Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading. Today, we shall be analyzing the Hindu newspaper dated 27th of December 2021 of the New Delhi edition. The topics to be discussed today have been presented on your screen. Time stamping for the same has been provided in the description box below. Let us begin our today's discussion. Now, this particular article appears on page number 6 as a lead article. The article is titled as "The Elderly Are the Assets, Not Dependents." This article shall be important from the perspective of GS paper 2 social issues, particularly under the subsection of issues related to the vulnerable sections. Now, this article as such highlights various healthcare related challenges faced by senior citizens in India. Accordingly, this article shall be important from the perspective of examination. As we can see, in mains 2013, a rated question on effects of globalization on the senior citizens in India has already been asked. Now, before discussing various aspects related to this particular article, let me first give you the background. See, presently, most of the social discourse around the population policies is centered around the demographic dividend. So most of the time we keep on emphasizing that India is facing demographic dividend where the share of the working age population in India is more than 51%, and this particular share is set to increase to around 59% by the end of 2041, and beyond 2041 the share of the working age population is set to reduce. That is why we keep on emphasizing on the urgency to reap the demographic dividend in India. Obviously, reaping the demographic dividend is extremely critical, but at the same time, India should also be well prepared to handle the population explosion of the senior citizens. According to Economic Survey 2018-19, the share of the senior citizens in the overall population is set to double from 8% to 16% by the end of 2041. So, not just focusing on demographic dividend, but we must also focus upon handling this population explosion among the senior citizens. We must design policies in order to effectively provide for care and support to these senior citizens. Now, the population explosion of the senior citizens is on account of the demographic transition, increase in life expectancy, and the advancements in the medical field. Now, for example, from the perspective of the demographic transition, most of you must be aware about the recent results of the National Family Health Survey 5. According to this particular report, the fertility rate in case of India, this has dropped down to below the replacement level fertility. Presently, the fertility is around 2 and it is below the replacement level fertility of 2.1 at all India level. So going forward, we would have less number of children who will be born in India, and that is why the share of the children in our overall population is set to reduce from 41% to 25% by the end of 2041. As more number of children move into the working age group, the share of the working age group, that is 20 to 59, is set to increase from 51 to 59, and beyond 2041 the share of the working age population is set to reduce. But if you look at the share of the senior citizens, that is the age group of more than 60, the share of senior citizens is set to double from 8% to 16%. So, what should be our approach toward the senior citizens? See, presently, the senior citizens, they are considered to be a kind of burden on the economy. This is so because as the share of senior citizens increases, there would be decline in the labor force, which could lead to increase in labor cost, higher cost of manufacturing, and so on. This could lead to decline in savings and consumption expenditure in the economy. And lastly, the government would have to spend more amount of money to look after the healthcare and welfare of the senior citizens. So that is why the present perception is as the share of senior citizens increase, it would be a drag on the economy. But India needs to handle this transition carefully. So rather than viewing the senior citizens as a burden on the economy, we must view the senior citizens as productive assets. The senior citizens have contributed immensely to the growth of economy. It is our time now to look after their welfare and provide them with the necessary support. So, apart from looking after their welfare as well as their needs, it is also being said that the senior citizens can also emerge as productive assets in an economy, which means that the senior citizens can emerge as a tool to promote growth and development. Let's see how. See, first and foremost, it is being said that the higher share of senior citizens would lead to development of the silver economy. So, what exactly is a silver economy? Silver economy is basically a economy which is geared to meet the needs and aspirations of the senior citizens. Silver economy refers to the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services for the welfare of the senior citizens. Now, for example, in order to provide for healthcare needs of the senior citizens, we would have to focus upon building the healthcare infrastructure. And as we build more of healthcare infrastructure, not only we will be able to provide for the healthcare needs of senior citizens, but at the same time, we would be able to create more jobs as doctors, nurses, pharmacists, etc. Similarly, it can lead to development of various financial institutions which could meet the financial needs of the senior citizens. For example, if we could have financial institutions to provide for insurance, pension, banking needs of the senior citizens. So on one hand, we are providing for the welfare of senior citizens, while on the other hand, it would lead to development of financial institutions. Similarly, if you look at the IT infrastructure, that is the IT companies can develop various goods and services for the welfare of the senior citizens. Take for example, the electronic companies can provide for various goods and services such as the smart watches for the monitoring of health by the senior citizens. They can provide for the home automation by integrating the new age technologies such as artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, machine learning, and so on. So on one hand, it will lead to development of IT sector, while on the other hand, it will be able to cater to the needs of the senior citizens. Similarly, development of religious tourist circuits for the senior citizens, it can give a fillip to tourism, travel and hospitality industry. It can also create jobs at the local level and so on. So as you can see, when we treat the senior citizens as productive assets, automatically it will lead to development of silver economy. So on one hand, it will lead to silverization of economy where different sectors will make products in order to cater to the needs of the senior citizens. While on the other hand, we would be able to provide for welfare of the senior citizens. And lastly, see these senior citizens, they have immense expertise, they have immense experience, and their expertise as well as experience can in turn be used for the Indian economy by increasing the age of retirement. So we can enhance the productive capacity of the senior citizens. So it is being said that our future approach towards senior citizens should be based upon not treating them as a burden. Rather, we should treat them as productive assets. So this is what this particular article basically says, that the elderlies are assets, not dependents. But the scope of this particular article as such is quite limited just to the healthcare challenges of the senior citizens. So in order to comprehensively cover all the aspects related to senior citizens, we will discuss various challenges faced by the senior citizens, the initiatives taken for the welfare of senior citizens, and what should be the way ahead. So based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt these two mains question for practice. The first question here is, the present demographic transition in India highlights a need for a comprehensive policy towards the senior citizens. Discuss the strategies which must be adopted to harness this transition. The second main question for our practice is, what do you mean by silver economy? Discuss its importance in providing support for the senior citizens while ensuring higher GDP. So let us understand various challenges related to senior citizens first, and then we'll discuss the initiatives and the strategies. See, presently the senior citizens face multifaceted challenges which can broadly be categorized under the economic challenges, healthcare challenges, social challenges, and emotional challenges. Coming first to the economic challenges. See, over a period of time, there has been increase in life expectancy from 50 years in 1970s to approximately around 75 years presently. In spite of increase in life expectancy, the overall age for retirement even today has remained at 60 years. because of which the senior citizens find themselves to be unemployed after the age of 60 years. Secondly, see, presently both the central government as well as the state government provide for various pension for the senior citizens. For example, the central government provides pension to the senior citizens under the National Old Age Pension Scheme. Now, presently there are a number of problems with these schemes. For example, first and foremost, this particular scheme is applicable only to the senior citizens who are living below the poverty line. So there is no universalization of pension. Secondly, the amount of pension amount which is provided under this particular scheme is quite lower, and it ranges between rupees 200 to rupees 500 depending upon the age of the senior citizens. So recently a global report was published known as the Global Pension Index report. According to the Global Pension Index report, the extent of penetration of pension in case of India is extremely lower, and India was ranked very poorly on this Global Pension Index report. The next aspect is with respect to skilling gap of the senior citizens, where there is a mismatch between the skill set of the senior citizens and the job requirements because of the rapid advancements in the field of technology. Now coming to the healthcare challenges, see, first and foremost, India has focused more upon providing for the healthcare infrastructure for the women as well as children. To a large extent, we have neglected the healthcare infrastructure for the senior citizens. Now, for example, in case of India, we have an act known as Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. Under this particular act, the state governments are required to set up dedicated wards at the district hospital in order to provide for the welfare of the senior citizens. But according to a recent status report filed by the center before the Supreme Court, more than 16 states and union territories have not set up dedicated wards at the district hospitals for the senior citizens. Now, this clearly shows that the healthcare infrastructure, especially for the senior citizens, has remained underdeveloped. Similarly, the other problems include the higher burden of communicable and non-communicable diseases, poor penetration of healthcare insurance. Now, for example, recently the Niti Aayog has highlighted that despite the huge success of the Ayushman Bharat scheme, even today, more than 400 million Indians are not covered under the healthcare insurance. And among these 400 million Indians, obviously there would be a large number of senior citizens who are not covered with the health insurance. Now coming to social challenges, first and foremost, the growth of nuclear families has led to loss of support and care for the elderly population. It has also led to higher burden on the elderly women to look after the household duties. And lastly, the senior citizens also face emotional challenges. See, some of the senior citizens must have lost their life partners. Some of the senior citizens may be jobless, because of which the senior citizens face loneliness. They face a loss of identity. And lastly, normally there is a conflict of values between the values of the senior citizens and the values of the younger population. And this in turn can lead to emotional turmoil for the senior citizens. Now, in order to provide for the welfare of the senior citizens, the government has undoubtedly taken a number of initiatives. Let us look at these initiatives one by one. First and foremost, the government of India, to be more specific, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment has come up with the National Policy on Senior Citizens 2011 in order to provide for income security, home services, age-old pension, and access to health insurance schemes for the benefit of the senior citizens. Nextly, we are implementing the National Old Age Pension Scheme. Next, we are implementing the Rashtriya Vayoshree Yojana. Rashtriya Vayoshree Yojana is a central sector scheme in order to provide for physical aids and assisted living devices for the senior citizens belonging to the BPL category. So under this particular scheme, various devices such as wheelchair, hearing aid, etc. are provided to the senior citizens belonging to the BPL category. The next and most important scheme is the SAGE scheme, which stands for Senior Care Aging Growth Engine Initiative. Now, this particular initiative has been launched in order to silverize the Indian economy. Under this particular scheme, we are encouraging various startups to develop products in order to take care of the needs and the welfare of the elderly. For example, under this particular scheme, the startups are encouraged to develop various products such as the diagnostic kits, personalized wheelchair, develop various financial services for the elderly, and so on. Next, we have the Senior Citizens Welfare Fund for the welfare of the senior citizens. And lastly, we have a separate act known as Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007. Under this particular act, there is a legal obligation on the children to take care of their parents. Under this particular act, if the parents feel that their children are not taking their care, then the parents can approach the dedicated tribunal set under this particular act, and the parents as such can claim maintenance from the children. So this particular act ensures that the younger population take care of their parents. Now coming to the strategies. See, as I've highlighted at the start of our discussion, the senior citizens should be considered as a productive assets for an economy rather than considering them as burden. So in order to enable the senior citizens to contribute to the growth process of an economy, we would have to adopt a number of strategies. See, first and foremost, we would have to promote the silver economy. So, as I've highlighted before, by promoting silver economy, on one hand, we would be able to develop various sectors such as healthcare, financial sector, IT sector, hospitality sector, travel and tourism, etc. While on the other hand, we would be able to cater to the needs and aspirations of the senior citizens. Nextly, we must promote productive aging. Productive aging here means we must ensure that senior citizens above the age of 60 should also be able to contribute to the process of growth, for which first and foremost we would have to increase the age of retirement from 60 to 65, and second, we must provide them with other career options after the age of retirement. For example, we can hire them as teachers, we can hire them as doctors, we can hire them as consultants in government departments. So we would be able to use their expertise on one hand, while on the other hand, we would be able to provide them employment opportunities. Next, to provide the healthcare security, first and foremost, we would have to improve the coverage of the health insurance schemes, particularly the Ayushman Bharat scheme. Government would have to spend more amount of money on creating the healthcare infrastructure for the elderly population. And lastly, we must set up national and regional institutes in order to promote the healthcare needs of the senior citizens. Next, coming to the economic security. See, as I said, presently the pension as such is limited only to the BPL population. So we need to extend the pension, particularly the National Old Age Pension Scheme, to cover certain APL families. And these APL families can be identified through the socio-economic caste census. So just like how we provide for the subsidized LPG cylinder under the Ujjwala, both to BPL as well as APL families, on similar lines, pension can be given to the people who belong to both BPL as well as APL. And these families can be identified through the socio-economic caste census. Nextly, we must focus upon reskilling of the senior citizens according to our demands so that they will be able to get the necessary employment. Nextly, we can also promote entrepreneurship among the senior citizens by providing the senior citizens with the priority sector loans by the different banks. Nextly, the private sector can be incentivized to manufacture goods and services for the welfare of the senior citizens by providing with various tax exemptions. Nextly, we can also impose a separate cess wherein we can mobilize the necessary money in order to spend for the welfare of the senior citizens. We must also create a separate ministry which is dedicated to work for the elderly population. And lastly, we must inculcate the necessary values of caring for the parents by redesigning the school curriculum and the school education. So these are some of the important aspects as far as this particular article is concerned. So based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt and write answers to these two main questions for practice. With this, let us now take up the next article. Now this particular article appears on page number 12, that is the business page. This article is related to the recently launched scheme of the RBI, that is a retail direct scheme. This article shall be important mainly with respect to prelims under the subsection of Indian economy. See, recently the Reserve Bank of India has launched a new scheme known as the retail direct scheme. This particular scheme will enable the retail investors like you and me to buy the government securities from the RBI directly in the primary market. Now this particular scheme is quite important because, as you can see in prelims 2021, a related question with respect to the investment by the retail investors in the government securities has already been asked. Apart from that, in prelims 2018, question has been asked with respect to various aspects of the government securities. So based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt certain prelims questions for practice. So please take a pause, have a look at these prelims questions for practice. So right now on your screen, you can see 4 prelims question for practice. And in the next slide, you can see the other 3 questions for practice. So by the end of this particular discussion, you should be in a position to attempt these 7 prelims questions for practice. So before understanding various aspects of the retail direct scheme, let us first understand the background to this particular scheme. I hope all of you must be aware that the Reserve Bank of India, it acts as a debt manager of the center as well as states. That means that whenever the center or the states want to borrow the money from the market, the RBI in turn borrows the money on behalf of the government. So in this particular case, the RBI issues what is known as the government securities. Now these government securities, they are initially issued in the primary market. So primary market is basically a place where the issuance of the new government securities takes place. Right now, the Reserve Bank of India auctions these government securities on its platform known as the eKuber platform. The eKuber platform, it is a core banking solution platform of the Reserve Bank of India. And right now, this particular platform is used for auctioning of the government securities. So presently, we have different stakeholders who invest in these government securities. These entities include banks, primary dealers, financial institutions such as insurance fund companies, pension fund companies, mutual fund companies, and so on. See, as far as the primary dealers are concerned, primary dealers are those entities which have been authorized by the Reserve Bank of India to invest in the government securities. So all of these entities, they maintain account with the Reserve Bank of India. And since they maintain account, these entities are allowed to directly buy the government securities from the RBI in the primary market. So what about the retail investors like you and me? Can we buy the government securities in the primary market? See, here you must understand that the retail investors are obviously allowed to buy the government securities in the primary market. But as of now, the retail investors cannot buy the government securities directly from the RBI. This is so because retail investors like you and me, we do not maintain account with the RBI. That is why we are not allowed to buy the government securities from the RBI directly. So if we want to buy the government securities in the primary market, there are 2 conditions to be fulfilled. First and foremost, we need to have a demat account. And secondly, we can buy the government securities indirectly through the aggregators. So indirectly, we can buy the government securities through the aggregators such as banks, stock exchanges, primary dealers, mutual fund companies, etc. So the retail investors are allowed to buy the new government securities in the primary market, but we cannot buy them directly from the RBI. We can buy them indirectly through the aggregators, for which we need to have a demat account. So once the government securities are issued in the primary market, the next aspect is the secondary market. The secondary market is basically a place where the trading of already issued government securities takes place. Now with respect to secondary market, that is for the trading of government securities, we have 2 different platforms. One is the negotiated dealing system order matching, NDSOM. Now this particular platform is owned by the Reserve Bank of India, but right now it is operated by the Clearing Corporation of India Limited. The trading of government securities also takes place on the stock exchanges. For example, on the Bombay Stock Exchange, you have a separate platform known as the direct platform. And on the NSE, you have a separate platform known as a GoBid platform. Now, this is a present method for the investment in government securities. So, as you can see, the retail investors are not allowed to buy the government securities in the primary market directly from the Reserve Bank of India. So, now what RBI has done is, RBI has come up with a new scheme known as a retail direct scheme. Under this retail direct scheme, retail investors like you and me, we can buy the government securities from the RBI directly. And in order to buy the government securities from the RBI directly, we need to open an account with the RBI, and this particular account would be known as the Retail Direct Gilt account. So by opening this particular account, we can buy the government securities directly from the RBI in the primary market, that is when the RBI issues the new government securities. So this is a retail direct scheme. Now, as far as your prelims examination is concerned, as you can see in previous year prelims, questions have been repeatedly asked with respect to various aspects of government securities. So what we will do here is we'll understand the sources of government's borrowing, that is how does the government borrow money through the issuance of various financial instruments. Then we'll look into the retail direct platform as to how it will enable the retail investors to buy the government securities directly. And then we'll look into certain prelims related aspects about the newly launched scheme. So as I said, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt the 7 prelims questions for practice. See, both central government as well as state government can borrow money both from the market as well as from the Reserve Bank of India directly. So let's first discuss about the borrowings from the market. In order to borrow money from the market, the government can borrow either long-term loans or the short-term loans. So let's first discuss about the long-term loans. So in order to borrow long-term loans, the central government issues what is known as the dated securities. As far as the state governments are concerned, the state governments issue a different types of financial instrument known as the state development loans. So even though the nomenclature is different, the purpose for which the financial instruments are issued is same. The purpose here is to raise long-term loans from the market. Apart from these two government securities, we have certain special government securities. Some of these special government securities include the oil bonds, which were recently in news, the recapitalization bonds, which are issued in order to undertake recapitalization of public sector banks, the sovereign gold bonds, and the Uday bonds, which are specifically issued by the state government in order to improve the financial position of the DISCOMs under the Uday scheme. Now, this is as far as the long-term borrowings is concerned. So, as you can see here, both the center as well as the state government can resort to long-term borrowings from the market. But when it comes to short-term borrowings from the market, only the central government is allowed to borrow short-term loans from the market. The state governments right now, they are not allowed to borrow short-term loans from the market. So to borrow short-term loans, the central government issues treasury bills and cash management bills, and these treasury bills and cash management bills, they can be issued only by the central government and not by the state government. Now coming to the treasury bills, the treasury bills have a maturity period ranging from T91, T182 and T364. So here the number here denotes the maturity period of a particular treasury bill, that is 91 days, 182 days and 364 days. So as you can see, when we say short-term borrowings, it is usually for a period less than 1 year. The treasury bills are issued at a discount and they are redeemed at a face value. Now, for example, let's say the Reserve Bank of India is issuing a treasury bill, that is T91, whose face value is equal to rupees 100. Now, you as an investor, you will not be required to pay the entire 100 rupees to purchase this T91. Instead of 100 rupees, you will purchase this treasury bill at a discount. Now, let's say you purchase it at rupees 95. Upon the maturity period, that is after 91 days, you as an investor, you will get back the 100 rupees. So what's the profit which you are getting here? You are getting a profit of rupees 5. The next financial instrument is a cash management bill. So the cash management bill is similar to treasury bill, wherein the cash management bills, they are issued at discount and they are redeemed at face value. But the cash management bill is different from treasury bills in basically two different ways. The first one is with respect to maturity period and second one is with respect to purpose for which the cash management bills are issued. As you can see, the minimum maturity period of treasury bill is 91. However, the cash management bills are issued for a period for less than 91 days. That is, whenever the government wants to borrow loans for a period less than 91 days, it goes for issuance of cash management bills. And if it needs money for more than 91 days, then it goes for the treasury bills. So that's the first difference. The second difference here is the government issues the treasury bills to address the temporary mismatches in the cash balances. So what do you mean by temporary mismatch in the cash balances? Now let me explain this by a simple example. Now let's say in the month of February, the government needs to spend approximately around rupees 100. But for this particular month, February, the government is expected to earn only 80 rupees. So for this month of February, the government is facing a cash shortage of rupees 20 to undertake the expenditure. The government expects that in the next month, that is in the month of March, the government will be able to earn an additional 20 rupees through different sources. Now, for example, through taxes, through disinvestment, and so on. So, right now, for the month of February, the government is facing a temporary mismatch of rupees 20, and the government expects that it can earn this additional 20 rupees in the next month. So in this particular case, in order to address this temporary mismatch of rupees 20, the government borrows short-term loans of rupees 20, and these short-term loans are borrowed through the issuance of the cash management bills. So please understand here that the cash management bills are always issued in order to address the temporary mismatches in the cash balances with the central government. And these cash management bills can be issued only by the central government. Now this is as far as the borrowings from the market is concerned. Now let's understand about the borrowings from the Reserve Bank of India. Now coming to whether the government can borrow long-term loans from the RBI directly. I hope all of you must be aware about the Fiscal Responsibility and Budgetary Management Act 2003. Under this particular act, the fiscal deficit was required to be maintained at 3% of India's GDP by the end of March 31st, 2021. Under certain exceptional circumstances, this fiscal deficit could increase by additional 0.5%. So this is a kind of escape clause in the fiscal deficit. And this escape clause can be invoked on account of certain exceptional circumstances such as national security, war, collapse of agriculture, structural reforms, decline in GDP growth rate, and so on. Now the question is, can the government borrow long-term loans from the RBI directly? See, as of now, under the FRBM Act, the government cannot normally, I repeat, the government cannot normally borrow long-term loans from the RBI in order to finance its deficit. So under normal circumstances, the government cannot go for deficit financing. That is, it cannot borrow loans from the RBI in order to finance its fiscal deficit. But under certain exceptional circumstances, the government can undertake deficit financing. That is, under certain exceptional circumstances, the government can borrow long-term loans from the RBI in order to finance its deficit. And these exceptional circumstances are same as the exceptional circumstances for invoking the escape clause for fiscal deficit. So on account of exceptional circumstances such as the national security, war, collapse of agriculture, structural reforms, decline in GDP growth rate, etc., the government can resort to the deficit financing from the RBI directly. Now, this aspect is extremely important from the perspective of a prelims examination. Now coming to short-term borrowings. So in order to borrow short-term loans from the Reserve Bank of India, both central government as well as state government can resort to ways and means advances. So as you can see, with respect to short-term borrowings from the market, the state governments are not allowed to do so. Whereas with respect to short-term borrowings from the RBI, the state governments are allowed to do so, for which both center as well as state can resort to ways and means advances. So ways and means advances are basically the loan facility provided by the RBI to both center and state in order to address the temporary mismatches in their cash balances. The limit on ways and means advances is mutually decided by the RBI and the respective government. The maturity period on the ways and means advances is 90 days, and the rate of interest which the RBI charges on these loans is equal to repo rate. Now question is, can the state and the center exceed the limit on the ways and means advances? Yes, the center and state can borrow loans more than what has been stipulated under the limits. But when they are exceeding the limits on ways and means advances for a particular financial year, that time they will have to pay higher interest rate, and that interest rate will be 2% more than the repo rate. Now, for example, let's say for a state of UP, the limit on ways and means advances has been set at 1 lakh crore for a particular financial year. Now, the government of UP can borrow short-term loans of up to rupees 1 lakh crores from the RBI, for which the UP government will be required to pay the interest rate which is equal to repo rate. Beyond 1 lakh crore, if it wants to borrow, yes, it can borrow, but then it will have to pay a rate of interest which is 2% more than the repo rate. So this is how the ways and means advances basically work. Now coming to the retail direct platform. So as I discussed before, earlier the retail investors, they were not allowed to buy the government securities from the RBI directly. So the retail investors, they were supposed to buy the government securities through the stock exchanges or to the brokers. And these stock exchanges or the brokers in turn place orders with the RBI on behalf of the investors. So this was the earlier scenario. But now under the retail direct platform, retail investors like you and me, we can open a separate account with the RBI, which will be called as the retail direct jilt account. And through this particular account, we can directly buy the government securities from the RBI through the retail direct platform. Apart from that, we can also do a trading in the secondary market through the RBI's negotiating dealing system order matching as well as the stock exchanges. Now finally coming to some important prelims pointers on the retail direct scheme. So the question is, what kind of government securities can be bought? So as per the RBI's FAQ, basically four types of government securities can be bought on the retail direct platform, and these include the treasury bills, dated securities, state development loans, and the sovereign gold bonds. Now this becomes quite important because in prelims you can get a question as to which of the following government securities can be bought on the retail direct platform. That is why this aspect becomes important. Next, who can open an account? Any individual can open an account with the RBI, but here the individual need to have a bank account, a PAN card, and an officially valid document. Apart from that, please note here that even the non-resident investors are also allowed to invest through the retail direct platform. What kind of facilities are provided on the portal? This has been highlighted on your screen. Buying of government securities through primary auctions, buying and selling government securities in the secondary market, buying and selling sovereign gold bonds in the primary and the secondary market. Nextly, the retail investors do not have to pay any money for opening or maintaining account with the RBI. And lastly, the RBI has stipulated minimum and maximum investment on the government securities through the retail direct platform. As to what is the minimum investment limit and what is the maximum investment limit, that is not important from the perspective of your prelims examination. Broadly, you must understand that there is a minimum limit as well as a maximum limit. That alone should be more than sufficient. Now, based upon our discussion, you should be in a position to attempt the practice question number 1, practice question number 2, as well as practice question number 4. As far as practice question number 3 is concerned, the question here is, which among the following are eligible to be considered as the government securities for the statutory liquidity ratio? So as you know, as part of SLR, the banks are required to maintain certain percentage of depositors' money in the form of cash, gold, and government securities. Now the question is, which of these government securities can be considered as the government securities for the calculation of SLR? The options which are given here are dated securities, state development loans, cash management bills, and the treasury bills. And last option is special government securities such as oil bonds, recap bonds, and so on. Please understand here that as of now, dated securities, SDLs, cash management bills, and treasury bills, these four financial instruments can be considered as the government securities for the calculation of SLR. The special government securities such as oil bonds, recap bonds, they cannot be considered as government securities for the calculation of SLR. So the right answer to this particular question would be C. Next, coming to practice question number 5, 6 and 7. I hope you should be in a position to attempt these three practice questions based upon our discussion. So please do let me know the answers to these practice questions in the comment section given below. With this, let us now take up the next article. The next article appears on page number 1. Now, this particular article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of a recent speech delivered by the Chief Justice of India. In a recent speech, the Chief Justice of India has highlighted various challenges before the Indian judiciary. Hence, this particular article becomes important from the perspective of GS Paper 2, Polity and Governance. The various challenges as highlighted by Chief Justice of India can be used as a fodder points by you while writing an answer to a question in GS Paper 2. The first challenge is with respect to poor judicial infrastructure. The Chief Justice of India has highlighted that the judicial infrastructure, particularly the number of courtrooms, separate record rooms, etc., has remained quite poor. Apart from that, the adoption of digital infrastructure by the Indian courts has also remained quite poor. Hence, in order to ramp up the judicial infrastructure and to reduce the pendency of cases, the Chief Justice of India has suggested to set up the National Judicial Infrastructure Authority of India. So, this particular authority would have the mandate to create the necessary judicial infrastructure across the courts in India. The second important problem is with respect to judicial pendency. As of now, we have almost around 4 crore 60 lakh cases pending across different courts in India. The higher pendency of cases would prevent the people from having access to justice. Hence, in order to reduce the pendency of cases, the Economic Survey 2018-19 had given a number of recommendations. So you could probably incorporate these recommendations while writing an answer. The first recommendation is to increase the number of working days. See, presently, if you look at the Supreme Court, the number of working days of a Supreme Court in a year is around 190. For High Courts, it is around 232. And for subordinate courts, it is around 244 working days. So as you can see, the number of working days in the Indian judiciary is quite lower. Hence, the Economic Survey had suggested that we need to increase the number of working days to reduce the overall pendency of the cases. The second recommendation was to establish the Indian Courts and Tribunal Services. See, presently in case of India, the Chief Judicial Officers, they are not only involved in delivering justice, but they are also involved in administration of the justice. Administration part here basically means looking into the back-end functions of the judiciary. For example, the management of records, management of cases, and so on. So there is a higher burden on the Chief Judicial Officer. Hence, the Economic Survey had recommended that we need to create a separate cadre known as the Indian Courts and Tribunal Services, and this separate cadre should be involved in the judicial administration. So automatically we would be able to reduce the burden on the Chief Judicial Officers, who then would be able to focus only on the delivery of justice. Nextly, we would have to focus upon the efficient deployment of technology, particularly through the e-courts and the National Judicial Data Grid. The next problem is with respect to the judicial vacancies. See, presently the judge population ratio in case of India has remained quite lower at 20 judges per million. This is considered to be quite lower as compared to the other countries. Apart from that, 25% posts are vacant at the subordinate courts, and most of the cases are basically pending before the subordinate courts. So the higher pendency of cases is attributed to the higher judicial vacancies. So in order to reduce the pendency of cases and to ensure that the cases are disposed on time, we would have to fill up the judicial vacancies, particularly at the subordinate courts. The next and most important challenge, as highlighted by Chief Justice of India, is with respect to lack of technical expertise. See, rapid development of information and communication technology has led to development of new age crimes. For example, bitcoins or the private virtual currencies can be used for money laundering. Similarly, through the usage of internet, sale of illegal material takes place on the dark web. Now, the judges as such, they have only the legal expertise to deal with such cases. But the judges do not have the necessary technical expertise to deal such cases. And in absence of the technical knowledge related to these new age crimes, the judges will not be able to deliver justice properly. Hence, the Chief Justice of India has highlighted that the legal curriculum needs to be updated. Apart from imparting legal knowledge, necessary technical knowledge should also be imparted to the future judges. And the next challenge is with respect to absence of well considered legislation. The Chief Justice of India has highlighted that in some of the cases, the Parliament of India has passed certain laws without scrutiny of their constitutionality. That is, Parliament has passed certain laws without ascertaining whether such laws are constitutional or not. Apart from that, Parliament has also passed certain laws without consulting the stakeholders. So, when Parliament passes a law without the scrutiny of their constitutionality or without consulting the stakeholders, obviously such laws come up before the judiciary for the judicial review. So, this in turn not only puts burden on the judiciary, but it also leads to frequent tussle between the executive and the judiciary. Hence, in order to avoid these problems, the Chief Justice of India has recommended or suggested that the executive should carry out prior consultation with the stakeholders. That is, the executive should take the views and opinions of the stakeholders before formulating a bill. Apart from that, the Parliament should also carry out an enhanced scrutiny of the bills by the parliamentary standing committees. So these are some important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. Now this particular article appears on page number 6. The article is titled as A Chance to Tap India's Equity in Myanmar. This article shall be important from the perspective of GS Paper 2 International Relations. Now this article has appeared in the newspaper in the context of the recent visit of India's Foreign Secretary to Myanmar. So when India's Foreign Secretary landed in Myanmar, he was received by Myanmar's Prime Minister himself. See, the military leadership in Myanmar is considered to be highly protocol conscious. In spite of that, the Prime Minister of Myanmar himself received India's Foreign Secretary and held extensive consultations with him. Now, this clearly shows two things. First and foremost, whatever stand India has taken with respect to military coup in Myanmar, this has benefited us. And secondly, this also clearly shows that the military leadership in Myanmar considers India as important as China. In this regard, this particular article here basically focuses upon three different aspects. First and foremost, the response of different countries with respect to military coup in Myanmar. What has been India's stand with respect to military coup in Myanmar, and how this particular stand has benefited India so far. So these are the some things which this particular article focuses upon. In case if you want to know the background to this particular issue, that is a military coup in Myanmar, what implications it has on India and other aspects, I suggest you to go through the recent DNS dated December 23rd, 2021. So we will not be going into those aspects once again. In today's DNS, we will confine our analysis only to these three dimensions. So, as you must be aware, there has been a military coup in Myanmar last year. And the response of different countries has been quite different with respect to this particular military coup. For example, the Western countries, they have been forcing Myanmar to transition to democracy as early as possible. So the Western countries have even threatened the imposition of sanction on the military leadership of Myanmar in order to forcefully transition to democracy. So this has been the stand of the Western countries. On the other hand, countries such as Russia as well as China have seen this as an opportunity to strengthen their relationship with the military leadership in Myanmar. These countries as such have not focused much upon the transition to democracy in Myanmar. As far as the regional countries are concerned, these countries which form part of ASEAN, these countries have come up with a 5-point consensus formula. According to this 5-point consensus formula, Myanmar should immediately put an end to the violence. It should restore dialogue among multiple stakeholders. The ASEAN countries would provide the necessary humanitarian assistance to Myanmar. And ASEAN as a group would also try to mediate between the different stakeholders in Myanmar. So this is a 5-point consensus formula which has been put forward by ASEAN. But this 5-point consensus formula has been rejected by the military leadership in Myanmar. So as you can see, different countries have adopted different approaches to deal with the issue in Myanmar. So while some countries have explicitly focused upon forcing Myanmar to transition to democracy, Countries such as Russia and China are relatively silent with respect to the transition to democracy, whereas the regional leaders are trying to bring about peace and stability in Myanmar. As far as India is concerned, see, for long, that is since 1990s, India's policy towards Myanmar has always been based upon the policy of non-interference. That is, India would not unnecessarily interfere in the internal matters of Myanmar. India obviously wants Myanmar to transition to democracy, but once again, India's stand has been that transition to democracy should be driven internally rather than through external forces. Moreover, India's approach towards Myanmar has been based upon engaging rather than criticizing. That is why during the recent visit of India's Foreign Secretary, India has broadly agreed with the 5 point consensus formula that Myanmar should end violence, it should restore the dialogue, and it should transition to democracy at earliest. But once again, we are not explicitly forcing Myanmar to adopt democracy. We have been emphasizing that this transition to democracy should be driven by internal forces rather than through external forces. So, this kind of wait and watch approach, this kind of policy and non interference, this kind of policy of engaging rather than criticizing has benefited India. This is so because by adopting such a policy, India has been able to maintain good relationship with both the military leadership as well as the party in power in Myanmar in the past. Now, this kind of India's approach, India's stand is quite pragmatic because India would need the support of the military leadership to solve the refugee problem in Manipur and to crack down on the insurgents which are presently operating in the northeastern part of India. So, going forward, India must continue to engage with the military leadership in Myanmar in order to secure its interests, and at the same time, it should constructively engage with the military leadership in order to enable the Myanmar to transition to democracy at the earliest. So, these are some important aspects which one should know with respect to this particular article. The next article appears on page number 1 of the text and context page of the Hindu newspaper. The article is titled as The India Out Campaign in Maldives. Now, this particular article highlights about the India Out campaign in Maldives and how it would affect the relationship between the two countries. Now, this particular article has already been discussed in much greater detail in our DNS dated 18th of November 2021. So, in case any of you have not watched this particular DNS, I suggest you to go through this particular DNS in order to understand as to what is the India Out campaign in Maldives and how it could affect the relationship between the two countries. The link to this particular DNS video has been given in the description box below. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Let us now have a look at the question for the day. The answer to the question that was asked in yesterday's DNS is option B.